Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today I'd like to discuss probably one of the biggest wasted opportunities in Wings of Fire, the Scorching. This video contains some major spoilers for the Flames of Hope, so if you haven't read that book then please click off. Also, before we start the video, huge shout out to my patrons, Crazy Roblox Man, LordIsopod, and DragonLover95. Thank you so much for supporting me. Links to their social medias are in the description. Anyways, without further ado, let's get into the video. I'd like to say that the story of the Scorching itself isn't entirely that bad, but rather the execution of it. The Flames of Hope was bizarre in so many ways, but the Scorching was what really made me fully realize just how messy this finale is. The Scorching was never an event in Wings of Fire that was a mystery. We all knew it occurred and that it was a massive, world-changing event. All we had been told was that the humans were the dominant life form and dragons took over. It was a very vague description, but just enough to where we knew it existed and that it was important to the history of Pyra. What the Flames of Hope tried to make us think was, oh, we had been lied to the whole time. The dragons weren't the victims, it was a mix of both the humans too. But that's not how we are made to perceive the Scorching. Tui never hinted that it may be fake, and never stressed the idea that the dragons were the victims. And yet we're supposed to be shocked by this revelation, if you can even call it that. It just made me go, literally, who cares? It's not something the reader can feel connected to, because the shock of it doesn't even really mean much. There's no backstabbing feeling or gasping moment. The true story of the Scorching lacks what could have been a fantastic reveal if the previous books had set it up. There's no build-up to the reveal and no reason for it to actually even matter. It just felt like a useless plot point to introduce Cottonmouth, aka the dumbest villain I've ever seen in my entire life. How was he supposed to be a twist villain? Cottonmouth being the one in control could have been an incredible reveal. Twist villains can be done right. Just think about it. The main characters have been battling who they think is the big bad the whole story. But once they defeat that villain, they find out that they weren't even as big as they claimed to be. There was someone in control all along, pulling the strings. If you've watched Guardians of the Galaxy, this may seem a bit familiar to you. They totally pulled it off well. The audience is meant to think that Ronan is the villain, and the Guardians believe it too. But at the end of the film, you realize that he wasn't the ultimate big bad. The one pulling the strings all along was Thanos, and the villain they had spent all that time fighting was basically just a useless nobody in comparison to the real antagonist. It leaves a feeling of hopelessness in not only the characters, but also the audience. Was their work all for nothing? Was this journey pointless? Twists like this one don't make it seem like the film was useless or filler. The characters learn something by the end, and it sets up more content in the future, if done right. Wings of Fire could have pulled this off, but it failed miserably. I genuinely think this is the weakest plot point in the entire series. And the story itself is just mediocre. I can see the idea of the humans taking advantage of the want, and I like that concept. However, the story of the Scorching really contradicts itself several times and has us asking way more questions than before. How advanced were the dragons? We're meant to think that they're basically just brainless animals only acting on instinct, although that could just be because how the humans perceive it, because we did read this from a human POV. But how can some random dragons be intelligent enough to join together? It doesn't make much sense, because Tui tries telling us one thing and then shows us something else. It only raises more questions and makes the whole story seem a lot weirder. I can understand if the dragons became more advanced and rose up over time, but they did it quite fast, literally only in a couple of years. So, with the whole messy story of the Scorching, the way that the entire twist of it all just fell apart, and the lack of an interest, this is why I feel like the Scorching is a very weak plot point. The Flames of Hope had already been steering in a very odd direction, but it was at this point in the story that I felt it all just crumble. The way they introduced Cottonmouth, Wasp didn't seem to matter to the story anymore. Like I said before, and with the example I gave, a twist villain can work, and I just don't think it's one of Tui's strengths. Another example would be Hawthorne being controlled by the other mind. It didn't feel like an earned shock and wasn't all that interesting. In fact, I think it was fairly obvious to predict that he was evil based on the obvious hints we got. I'm not going to ramble too much about the Flames of Hope. You can check out my full review in another video. But I still feel like this needs to be said. With such a great series as this one, people tend to ignore the weaker aspects. And when you dive into it, there are so many ways this could have been changed to fit better with the story. The easiest option could have been to just not include this at all, mainly because of the lack of a build-up in the previous books. I know Tui wanted to include an earth-shattering revelation in the final arc, but there were other things she could have done that actually would have changed things. For example, Wasp could have gotten the upper hand for a majority of the book. It still could have come off as a twist, because we always expect the heroes to win in the end. And obviously the story wouldn't end on such a dark note, unlike my What If, but it surely would scare protagonists. Have Luna deal with this all alone and make things totally unexpected. Instead of such bizarre twists, include things that will actually make the reader second-guess everything. Scenes of Luna having to fight her friends, main characters actually dying, Wasp going to Pyre after finding the map. There were countless opportunities for Tui to include those crazy aspects of the story that she wanted for a finale. It could even have been as simple as Sundu being taken over by the other mind. If you remove the continual hints she presented in the book itself but never delivered on, this could have been shocking. You don't expect such strong characters to lose, but it can still happen. War is war, and people lose. I think you can see my disappointment here. The story ended with all the main characters having obvious plot armor, no stakes were involved after the villain twist, and it lacked that shock of a finale. In the end, there is no emotional weight to anything. Things could have been better, and I found myself being very disappointed by the end of the book, left only to think of what could have been. Anyways, what do you guys think? Let me know down below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!